Recording in progress. 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again so much for tuning in to the Engagement Cast. It's your host, Jessie Del Fierro, with my other lovely, fantastic host, as always, Andrés Moreno.
Hello. Welcome to our podcast, our recording of conversations all around the Engagement Lab. My pronouns are they, them, ekis. I am a Colombian artist and became a settler here in Turtle Island, just based out of Alberta, and more specifically Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territory. I lived in Red Deer, which actually borders both treaties. And I just want to say I'm really thankful to be able to know the full scope of the land that is Alberta. I'll pass it over to Jessie to introduce themselves.
Hello. My name is Jessie Del Fierro, and I am a second-generation non-binary Filipinx artist with the privilege to work in both the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people and on Treaty 7 territory, also known as Vancouver, BC, and Calgary, Alberta, respectively.
Thanks, Jessie. Like we said, this is a podcast that draws from a series of conversations and interviews from individuals who are paving the way for equitable, sustainable, inclusive, and diverse ecology for the arts, with a focus on Alberta's theater scene.
Through education, experimentation, collaboration with community, and perhaps most importantly, with love, joy, and curiosity, we have been gathering to learn and unlearn, share and listen, and actively create the stepping stones towards the future of our dreams. This is the movement we are building, and we are so excited for you to join us.
We have just finished the Banff in-person weekend, and we have done an online session with our two fantastic co-hosts, co-facilitators, JD Derbyshire and Adrienne Wong. And we just want to bring y'all up on what's going on.
Yeah, just so you have context, we did a 3-day weekend in Banff where we got all of our participants together and we got a chance to do a workshop, a leadership workshop that was led by Indigenous knowledge keepers Daryl Kootenay and Kyle Logan standing ready. They were both great and they talked us through a little bit of the word leadership. And we've also done our first session online, which was actually led by our two wonderful facilitators / mentors, JD Derbyshire and Adrienne Wong. Following, you'll be able to hear a conversation we had with them post the session. We asked them some questions and we really just get their perspective on this process that we're jumping in on and their original thoughts after having some time already with the participants. Welcome, JD. Would you like to start us off and introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello. It's great to be here and to see you all and, hear you all. I am deeply grateful to work and live as an uninvited settler on the unceded and occupied territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, colonially known as Vancouver. That's hard to say, colonially. Maybe there's a reason I can't pronounce it. I am a queer, non-binary, neurodiverse, mad artist and advocate for all things involving equity, particularly with a focus on disability justice. And it's been great working with you two. I also have a longtime collaborator, both as an artist and an activist, in Adrienne Wong, who I think is going to introduce herself next.
Hi, thank you. That's so great. I've just moved to Victoria, BC from Banff, Alberta. And so I'm learning a lot about where I live, and I have so far learned that this is the traditional territory of the Lekwungen speaking peoples, who are now known as the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nation. So I'm looking forward to learning more about where I am, an uninvited guest, and also to observe the nature and seasonal cycles here, which I think are impact us so much and we don't always notice or pay attention to. I'm an artist, I'm an activist, I'm an administrator, I'm a caregiver, and I have a particular interest in engagement and participation and making the world a better place for my children, and a very clear definition of better place being a place with radical plurality, which is an notion that JD introduced to me. But I do believe that there's room for everyone
I'm wondering if we can kick off the conversation by going through and asking both you, Adrienne and JD, what interested you in joining the project? Jesse and I started working on this project back in September 2021. And I believe we reached out to JD and Adrienne in October, November of 2021 with a loose draft of what this lab was going to be. But I'd love to start off by knowing like what was your impetus for joining and for hopping on the project?
I was excited to join the project and I felt grateful to be invited because I had only been living in Alberta for three years at that time. So I was really interested in getting a better network or just meeting the other practitioners in Alberta, and also these ideas of equity and how to affect change on a systemic level are things that are curiosities of mine and also like drive a lot of what I do. And also finally, I would say that trying to make change is lonely work. So whenever you get a chance to work with other people, it helps to reinvigorate for me at least, for the impetus, like, okay, yeah. It's not just me. There is something wrong, and other people have noticed, and we can do something about it together. I believe in kind of like I believe in small actions adding up, and I have to remind myself that not everything has to be big. So that's where it came from for me. What about you, JD?
Thanks, buddy. Yes, I can echo a lot of what Adrienne said, and then just also my deep belief that we are, seeped in a culture, a patriarchal capitalist culture that still gives us ideas of individualism, like I'm going to do this and I'm going to conquer this and I'm going to beat this, and all kinds of very aggressive, I'm the one to do this language. And so I think that we're seeing in the areas of equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility a real move from allyship, which is important and ongoing, to coalition, to understanding, like keeping lots of room for people who haven't, spoken at all. Like we have to make room for all the emotions. We have to take the time it takes to really hear people and the historical inequities as they reveal themselves through people, like what that really means on an individual way. And then we're seeing underneath that, I think now, these commonalities and these reasons for all working together, for all wanting change. And so as a person who was born and raised on Treaty 7 territory and spends a lot of time still in Mohkinstsis and Calgary, a chance to meet other artists and administrators and people interested in these things, and then just to grow this coalition, I think what's very interesting as artists and arts administrators and activists is, we don't organize very well because we have such an unregulated industry that just to make a living, we're very overwhelmed. And so I think creating these spaces like Jesse and Andrés has done is, I don't like to think of it as a beginning because I think it's really somewhere in the middle, but it's a great gathering that can then move us from allyship to coalition. And anytime that happens, I'm super excited always to hear different voices, always to, as we have seen in this initiative so far, come up against difficult questions, get to really face nobody knows what to do in this moment. And so we got to keep talking, we got to keep listening, and then finding little things to try that are going to help move us towards these bigger changes that have to happen. And that's it for me in a nutshell. Whatever that means.
Thank you both for that. That's a beautiful nutshell. To give a little recap of where we started, after we messaged JD and Adrienne, we had a session in Banff that was 3 days long in person. And it was aimed at starting to sow the seeds of what we were going to talk about in the engagement lab, and also see what our participants, where they were joining us and meeting us at, so that we really knew where they could start. Throughout that 3 days, Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown was brought up. The embeddedness chart was also brought up, which will be part of the notes here with the podcast, so you can take a look at it. But it was very clear that this group was not here to be prescribed work, but it had its own purpose and its own, every single participant really came in wanting something out of this lab, which was a beautiful gift that was bestowed onto us.
It's also so important to know that like all of us are coming together from our own journeys. And it's important to like acknowledge the context that we went to Banff to come together on this and focus on this work in the middle, not the middle, but like during a pandemic and all of the challenges and complications and complexities that came with that circumstance, because things are always changing, things are always ongoing. And where we were 6 months ago in regards to like sort of just emerging from the restrictions of a pandemic to where we are now, and we're returning back to more in-person events.
Thank you for bringing that up. I also just wanted to say there was a lot of learning curves that we were very lucky to have JD and Adrienne present for. And I'm wondering if JD and Adrienne, you want to talk a little bit about some of the growing pains we had to go through in Banff. Would any of you like to go first?
I'll go. I was just reflecting on the term you used, Andrés, of growing pains, because I think you throw a bunch of people together, and I think the process is a lot about people getting to know each other. And when people are getting to know each other, you're not only in the professional context of let's collaborate and change the world, but this process felt a little bit more closer to the heart, I guess, because it's, how are we in the world? How is our work in the world? How do we want to be in the world? And what's in the way of that? So it's kind of personal. And then you have all of the kind of interpersonal social dynamic stuff that happens, where the anxieties that we all carry and in different ways, and our ability to suspend knowledge, like suspend conclusion. This is definitely something I learned from JD, because I always want to know what the next step is, and I want to know what we're aiming for, and then I want to go get that thing. But what I had to learn, and I think is part of it, is that first we need to know who's here, and we need to know what's like who everybody is and what's going on. And we also need to know, like, how do we take care of ourselves inside of this group, and how can we support this kind of unknowingness, this entering into unknowingness. And that's a very personal process. And sometimes people are up for it, and some people are not up for it, and some people are in different places. So you've got a whole bunch of people in completely different places coming together with kind of the same goal. So there has to be an expectation for some storms, for some growing pains, for some disconnection, for some conflict, because it's through resolving those things or addressing them or saying, oh, there's a conflict here, oh, there's a problem here, that I think we actually started to understand who the group is. So it is growing pains. Like this, there's no problem with it. That's the job. Like that is the thing that we're there to do. But we as a society, I think, assume that things are going well when there's no conflict, and that keeps so many of us silent because we don't want to create conflict, so that you never actually get to the job, which is understanding community and understanding groups. You have to go through, well, I want to do this. Well, I want to do this. Well, that doesn't make sense to me. And so navigating that is a job to me. I think that was something that came out very clearly to me after our time in Banff. Like, we're not here to, we actually can't teach these people anything. They're experts. They know a lot. We actually just need to facilitate an opportunity for this group to become a group.
I think that, the biggest structure that we have to dismantle, the biggest system, is how we are all products of Western thinking. That's our minds have been colonized, right? So we all come from a way of thinking that goes back to the Greeks or the Romans. I'm pretty sure it's Greeks. I don't really care if I get this attribution wrong, but a bunch of men who sat around talking about how we should think. And, we all are in that. And that is, we come from this way of thinking that we're supposed to form a thesis. And then that's the most important part, like get your thesis up there and then work towards proving that thesis. That's how all our education works. That's how we're trained to think. So it's not our fault that we have this inner desire to know, and we don't feel safe when we don't know. Like I should know what I'm trying to prove or disprove. The problem with that kind of thinking is that anything that goes against the thesis, you're not going to look at unless it provides a counterpoint, a quick counterpoint. But it's all about proving you're right. And then, most of us are involved in lifelong theses that we don't even know we carry, that we're trying to prove, right? And so now we're trying to get to this way of thinking where it's like, what if there's all kinds of knowledge? What if there's all kinds of knowing? What if this is wrong? Like this, what if this is really good for some things and not so good for other things? So poor little humans, there we are. Whenever we gather in a group, we're at different places in our journey, different places in our learning, different emotional states. I think it's very true that we were gathering what Jesse said, I think that was my first in-person facilitation in like a year and a half, maybe 2 at that point. And that's just kind of, the beauty of this so far for me has been in embracing that mess. It's like you're either going to buy into the problematic system of right and wrong or good and bad or all those binaries. All binaries drive me crazy. And in the case of our first get together in Banff, I think we wanted to download a bunch of very basic information so that we all felt like we were on the same page. And the problem with that was nobody had even opened their books. Nobody, the books should have been under the table. We should have pushed the desk to the side. And so I can see how that happened. And really what people needed to do was we were re-entering society for the first time. So I think we just got caught in that very human thing of, this is the way we've always done things, so let's do it that way. And we forgot the circumstance of the pandemic, of the arts being literally almost at a standstill at that point. And we were trying to do our best. I don't think all of it was, I think there was worth in some of the things that were brought to that, but we just sort of forgot that idea of what it's like to be in space. And we've been on Zoom calls. And so Zooms are entirely, download, and just that, to me, it was like an awakening. I remember sitting after one of maybe the first day or whatever, we went to the little mountain lodge. I can't remember what it's called, but anyway, right there in Banff Center, and we had burgers or something. I just kept getting weepy because we were all sitting around a table, So, I think it's a real call for when we separate the mind, the body, and the spirit, right? And this is the biggest decolonizing thing that's happening all over, right? It's like, that's what we've done. And so learning is just the head. Well, it's not. There was bodies and spaces, there was emotions, there was the very real fact that, you have people that have been on this equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility journey for a really long time and don't want to go over the basics again. And then there's people who are just at the beginning. And how do we keep all the kids in the pool? How do we, so yeah, I so agree with Adrienne. And I know we've had lots of talks about this, Jesse and Andreas. It's coming, it's knowing our own, if we're facilitators, it's like having support circles so that we can really be honest coming up against resistance. So like, if we try something and it doesn't work, or it doesn't do what we thought it would do, or it gets pushback, that's hard on facilitators. That requires some emotional work and some refiguring out. And so I think it's really important that we're never standing alone in this work, right? Because we got to talk things out. We got to get the feedback. We all talked about it. We made adjustments. Nobody was on their own. And when we talk about allyship, moving from allyship to coalition, this is a coalition. This is a coalition of facilitators who are growing community. I have this friend that literally sometimes mail them gold stars in an envelope, because they're so aware of their own needing to get a gold star, and they're so amazing. But I'm like, I don't know, here's some gold stars, just stick them on your forehead. So, it's keeping humor, it's keeping, what matters is the effort, right? What matters is the intention. And the intention is that we are all people in this circle anyway, who have experienced oppression of some kind or another. And so we can use that experience of living with that to help others, people who can't even get into the system, to build up our strength to have that conversation with the person who's thinking about these things for the first time, and I like to remember that and I've said it many times, the engagement lab is just not a beginning and an end, like to keep thinking about it as we don't know how it'll be funded or what it'll be next, but to keep thinking about, it's not about getting the thesis proven and the paper written. It can be about those things, research, but it's not about, finite things that we really, really learned. And here's the best practices you need for moving forward. One of those practices, though, is hooking back to where we gain knowledge. And I wanted to just remember to say that the whole idea of allyship to coalition is really beautifully written in a book, What White People Can Do Next, by Emma. I don't know how to pronounce their last name because I've never heard it and I'm dyslexic. It's Dabiri. So yeah, highly recommended. Final thought.
All of these resources will be available where you find this podcast. We will make sure that this information is available to you. But thank you so much, you two. What a fantastic peek. And I say peek because it's like just such a small part of this process that we're able to really encapsulate. And it's so interesting because even talking about this now, for those in the engagement lab who have been with us since the beginning, this process very much did start with the hypothesis. But in a lot of ways, it's like, you don't know what you don't know. So you start with what you know. And then the process is like unlearning that, learning different ways of approaching this. It's like one of the things that I think about a lot from what I've learned at Banff was like this idea of assumed trust for the title of facilitator and organizer. And a lot of that comes from knowing who we are as individuals and the idea that we as individuals have accomplished so much, but it's only when we get together that change can happen. And we're experiencing that now, even with the structure of the engagement lab. And a curious that we've held is like, we've talked about the small incremental changes that we made for this process that we are existing in. And how is that encouraging a long-term sustainable structural change? How has this experience for y'all influenced, I guess, in a way, or confirmed or rejected the idea that we approach this work? Because I know for me, so much has changed.
Jessie, can I ask a clarifying question?
Absolutely.
So I think what you're asking, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I think that you're asking, like, is there a way in which the experiences we've gone through together through the engagement lab, as the four of us specifically in the planning and responding, are there ways in which those experiences are affecting me and how I'm taking this away and making change inside of my own life? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, and not to feel like I have the answer to fix all problems, but to touch upon a little of the curiosities and experiences that we've learned from, and noticings. I think noticing is a word that I'm going to highlight.
Noticing is a great word, and that's a great place to start for me, because I think GD's practice of field notes has been something that I go back to regularly in my life. Just, oh, what am I feeling right now? Why am I, where did that start? Where did that feeling start? What happened? Oh, yes, that did happen. That person did say that in that way. And it's not unusual. It's not strange that I might have a feeling after hearing that. So that kind of practice of understanding the cause and effect nature of my experience, and also that sometimes my observations are colored by or influenced by my physical state, my mental state, my spiritual state. As somebody who's in a state of moving, like I don't know that I can really trust my instincts right now, because I'm a little out of balance. So that's one thing I've come back to. And then another conversation I think about a lot was around the idea of the affinity groups after our sessions, where the first couple sessions after our Banff time, there would be time post main session for affinity groups to meet and to discuss. And one of the ways that we had sorted or organized people were individuals from the global majority and then the predominantly white institutions. And that was the original sort. And then that made some of our participants very uncomfortable. And at the same time, it allowed other of our participants to feel safe or held in order to be able to disclose experiences or thoughts. So I thought that idea of cohorting was interesting. And then it also sparked a conversation around oppression and around buying oppression according to race or racial experience, and the difference between racial experience and cultural experience, and the many people many people who have been oppressed for different reasons that might overlap, and how that had to start, like that really challenged the idea of cohorts, a race-based cohort, because I think initially the idea was that the participants representing predominantly white institutions would have a space to download, discuss, ask questions amongst each other, where the work, the labor of answering those questions was shared inside of that cohort, and with the assumption that oftentimes people who are from the global majority or who have experienced oppression also have to take on the labor of explaining why that thing is oppressive. And that we wanted to alleviate that labor. And we did get pushback on that, which I thought was great, because then we had to have like this longer discussion. We had to kind of really confront what the purpose of that time was and how best to provide it. And it always also reminds me of when you're working with accessible practice or MAD practice, where everybody talks about their access needs at the top, and then you have to figure out how to serve everybody's access needs, and there's usually access needs that like directly contradict each other. But the spirit of solving that and making sure everyone can be present, that's the spirit of it is really crucial. I think that's the end of my thought. I can't even remember what the question is.
Sometimes I've asked questions and I'm like, do questions even need to be answered? Or is it just an opportunity to like direct the conversation in a way that we're curious about?
That's kind of a beautiful metaphor you just pointed out there, Jesse, about like, do questions even need answers? And I think going to this question of like, what are the noticings that we found since working on this? It's a little bit of like how we started with this very kind of, I'm not going to say like closed-minded, but very strict idea of what this lab was going to be and how it was going to look for the year. And we already had structure for all of our sessions and all of these things that we were taught that is what people need to be able to sign on to a lab, right? Or a process like this. And as we've worked on this, I've noticed that I've gained a lot of like the opportunity to look at things less strictly, right? And I think that has helped us in the engagement lab. And so talking about, do questions even need answers? Like that's a big thing that I can say comfortably in now.
Yeah, I love all that. I think it's real key to like learn to love the questions that live unanswered in your heart until you live into the answers. He said it better because he's a poet, but I'll try and get it for the end of this episode. But I think because, I'm in many meetings where there's an agenda and there's a list of questions, and I often wait to speak, and I often say, I'm not going to answer the questions in the order I'm going to speak, and you'll have to sort them after. And that is a disability practice of mine, because I can't separate, I can't untangle enough in my brain to suit those questions. But I've learned to appreciate why those questions are being asked. And I'm not trying to stick it to somebody by being like, I can't answer those questions in that order. I can just offer what I offer. And quite often it becomes a practice if it's a recurring thing. I think one of the biggest things I've learned is I shied away from bringing in some of my disability justice practices, which I do when I come into EDIA spaces, because there's just so much to deal with. And it is an intersectionality that I just get discouraged, because I'm very aware that it makes sense to me that, you know, the historical inequities to persons with disabilities is the last thing to make it to the table. And I get disappointed when people who are so active and caring in other measures of equity and diversity don't really hear this stuff. And so I think what I would have done differently is, you know, right away brought in Carmen Papilia, I think, who is a disability justice artist and activist, his 5 tenets of open access, which are just right off the top, exactly what Adrienne was talking about. We're going to spend that time. And if you don't know your preferences, you're going to think about them. And if we can't, you know, because what benefits the margins benefits all. And I think I would have been a little stronger. That said, I can do this now, having, you know, a long, almost a decade-long working relationship with Adrienne, and now, you know, Jesse and Andrés, you know, I feel safe to do that. But I think that that's what I think a lot about is every group I come into is that missing piece, which is, you know, again, part of the patriarchal capitalist world we live in. Like, let's set our emotions aside so we can get shit done. Let's set our needs aside. Let's set our daily differences aside. Let's not, because there's the people who are like, I don't want the check-in to go on for like, I need to get shit done. Or it's just like, all right, so what's between that and nothing, right? If we don't learn to take care of each other in every group that we come together, we don't have much of a chance of that echoing out, you know? So I think that what I think about after this is the merging of a lot of work that I've seen, you know, like we have to get funders and artists and arts organizations working together, which is how you gathered. But I think it's going to behoove us to come after this to see if we can actually build a strategy, to see if we had, like an organization has or a funder has, like a 4-year strategic plan, what would it be? And who would we need to take up what responsibilities? What would artists need to do? What would art workers need to do? What would funders need to do? What would organizations like Alberta Theatre need to do? You know, how can we keep expanding this coalition so that organizations or individuals who are just ready to take up that first little incremental thing can take up something incremental, but that we're also bringing more accountability down the line, you know? And I think that it is about arts workers organizing somehow. You know, I think a lot about something in my brain right now that's called AWOOSH, which is Art Workers Union for Sanity and Health. Because I think at the crux of everything are those ideas. You know, we're in a time of rapid climate change. We're in a time of not being able to sustain ourselves economically. We might have to go back to busking and wagon train performances sooner than we think. We might have to circle the wagons and do a show for food and shelter. You know, I don't think the arts will ever die, but I think that we are in a time where our imagination should need to be harnessed towards these very real world things that are going on. And inside all of that is equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. So I just think about, you know, harnessing the imagination that is actually our strongest skill set, you know, as artists and arts workers, and really spending the time to go all the way out in speculative design, speculative fiction, which is like, what could the world look like? And then backing it up. And that's going to take time. And it's going to take probably paid participation, like getting people feeling like if they contribute to those things, they're not volunteering. We can't keep asking people to surface their lived experience. So who's gonna think that's important? How do we convince funders that we want to collapse this idea of individual project organizational funding a little bit, and we want to say this is something that's needed right now to build those things out. So it is a matter of organizing in a way that I don't think we have before. We have our professional organizations, but we don't really have like an art worker, which I include artists in that, taking responsibility for these things because we haven't been able to sustain it. So those are sort of the, speculative fiction ideas in my mind at this time.
It's funny that you say, not funny, but it's interesting to me that you say speculative fiction, also funny, but because when you're talking about circling the wagons, I thought about that incredible show, Station 11, and the way that art, theater, graphic novels, storytelling sustain those people and built a new world and help them to survive and then try to build a new world, and also multiple worlds, right?
And it just makes me think back to, I'll echo strategic emergent strategy. And you brought up strategic planning and how we do that. And I didn't really understand it when Adrienne Marie Brown said, we have to move away from strategic planning and into strategic intention until the very moment you started talking about it. But the idea of strategic intentions allows for this flexibility and space that as long as we're moving towards our shared vision, as long as our intentions are clear and available and prioritized and important and valued, as long as our intentions are all that, we can trust that the direction we're moving in, however we're moving at whatever pace that's set by the group, that we're moving towards those intentions. And, I think about this all the time, especially with, as JD was mentioning, like art workers. Adrienne Marie Brown said, sustainability is easy. Birds coast when they can. And so how are we making this work sustainable? Acknowledging that it is hard, but it's also with the intentions of finding joy and following curiosity. Because there are folks who are going to be like, oh, I don't want this check-in to be so long. And how do we acknowledge that as an accessibility need and the conflict of like, well, we need folk. It's important to have the folks who have this like level of emotionality and capacity to feel and share how that they feel. And then also acknowledge that an accessibility need. There are some folks who don't have that capacity, and that their role is just as important. And so what do we do with that?
I'm definitely one of those people who don't want the check-in to go on very long. Like, I just don't want the check-in to go on very long because I get bored. And I think that the reason I don't want the check-in to go very long is I always feel like that at the beginning. Like, I felt like that when I went to see the 4-hour Uncle Vanya. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to go see a 4-hour Uncle Vanya. Oh my God. But then actually moment to moment is great. And that's what it's like going into the check-in. Go, okay, everybody's going to talk for as long as they need to talk. We're going to be here forever. But it really is the only way to hear everyone, for everyone to take a moment to hear everyone. And I suspect that when I am more with my own problems or more centering myself, that's when, or for whatever reason, I think that I'm better than what's happening in the room, because that happens to me sometimes. And then that's my ego interfering with, what's happening, which is to just listen and be present. And that's very hard for people because we have very short attention spans and we have devices that can keep us occupied. And so to just sit around and listen to people speak is pretty radical. And what I was reflecting on is, to continue that practice, to say like, oh, this takes the time it takes, but to front load it and say like, this is a radical act. And we're just here to listen to each other and talk to each other and see each other. And so you may find some resistance in yourself. And that makes perfect sense because this is unusual now. And that's the thing that I feel like I'm always learning is like, just say the thing. We don't have to like sneakily set things up. Like, can we not just say like, this is hard for me because of blah, 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 or the reason I'm doing this is because I want to hear from everyone. There's probably, I mean, it's not, and lastly, I would say to myself, well, there's no blanket. There's no blanket. It's one size fits one. It's like, well, let's try this. It makes sense with this group to do it this way.
Thank you for that. And as a wrap-up question, we could sit here and talk forever. We know that the four of us, we like to do this. But as a final question, is somebody who has gleaned so much knowledge from just getting to work with you both, I'm wondering if you can give us like a nugget of wisdom for anybody out there who might be looking into starting kind of this kind of work, so like a nugget of wisdom for anybody out there who's interested in starting this kind of work in their communities and how to persevere, for lack of a better word.
I think if there's advice is to find your people, like find your collaborators, the people who give you energy, the support group, the people who you can ask the hard questions or you can be vulnerable with, who are not going to make you feel better, but are going to like help you learn better. Like the people who are going to hold you to account, I guess. And those are good people to have in your circle.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think just do something. So it's so overwhelming, all the things that have to be changed. And there was this kind of crazy activist called Wavy Gravy in the 70s. And he used to say, just do something, whatever it is, save the oak tree seedlings and make crafts, learn a new language, just do something. And I just find that by staying engaged, you do find your people, you do find, and to remember, that there's a lot of cultural wisdom that's like we do what you do for, Indigenous people for the next 7 generations. Like any kind of activism, we are hooked on instant gratification in our world. And you just need to keep doing something and then have some fun. Like none of us can change the whole world. It's true. Things are really messy right now, but just pick your thing, find some good folks, have some fun. I think I was saying before the podcast, a bunch of queerdos got together to play soccer on Friday, and I hadn't done that in a couple of years. And we didn't check in. We just got out on the field and started playing together, and everybody was huffing and puffing and falling down, and it was fantastic. But anyway, so, also find ways of having fun.
That's so lovely. I wonder if this question extends to us, but the advice I'd have to give kind of stems from both of you to what you've said of like, know that you're not alone and that there have been people, there have been Indigenous knowledge, there have been groups, activists who have been doing this for a long time. So you're starting your own personal journey, but know that this journey is shared amongst generations. So you don't have to take on that weight by yourself. There are people out there.
In the spirit of extending this question that I asked, bringing it back to me, I would say, as somebody who started this journey quite fresh, I would say, I think is just never be scared to ask for clarification. For me, that's been a big part. I've been very, very fortunate that with Jesse and now JD and Adrienne, like I've got huge knowledge right here as part of my group. But instead of sitting in that, I'm behind, so why am I going to do anything? It's about what am I or what can I bring to offer to keep working and to making the work continue, right? And then allowing myself to be changed by what I'm learning, I think is also the big one. Like allowing myself to really, really learn that this isn't because I've been doing it wrong my whole life, but it's because there's better ways to do it moving forward. And with that, I'm going to say thank you to everybody, to JD, Adrienne, Jesse, and for being here, to y'all for listening. And we look forward to talking to you in our next podcast, in our next episode, or in our next conversation, whatever that looks like. But for today, just, immense gratitude to JD and Adrienne for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Bye. The Engagement Lab podcast is possible with the initial support from 3 local foundations to transition our all-in program to the 3550 initiative and the Engagement Lab. The foundations were the Edmonton Community Foundation, Calgary Foundation, and the Rozsa Foundation.
We're thrilled to announce that the Engagement Lab is supported by both Alberta Culture's Community Initiatives Program and the Canada Council for the Arts. Feed Alberta is grateful to our operating funders, the Alberta Foundation for the Arts, the Edmonton Arts Council, and Calgary Arts Development. Thank you so much for tuning in.
And we'll see you next time at the Engagement Lab podcast.